Hello, my name is Jack Crowe, and I'm an aortic dissection survivor. I'm so happy to be invited to do a Survivor Series YouTube for Aortic Hope Foundation. Really a wonderful organization that's spreading the word about aortic disease and about living our best lives in the process. I'm going to tell my story, but first I suppose I should make some introductions. The first introduction is right behind me. These are 200-year-old hemlock pines. My wife Ave and I spend most of our time in Chicago, but we also have a cabin up here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in the wilderness. We're next to the 20,000-acre old-growth forest called the Sylvania Wilderness. And I mention that because it's almost like a character in the story I'm about to tell. Also, one thing a little bit different about my story is that we're going to be talking a fair amount about exercise and what exercise means pre-dissection and what exercise can mean post-dissection. And particularly at the end, I'll say a word about a group, a niche Facebook support group called Aortic Athletes that I and another person helped start. So we're going to talk more about exercise maybe than some of the other Survivor Series that I've seen. And finally, I also want to note the obvious is that each of us has our own experience with aortic disease. I know that many of us are impacted differently in different ways. Some of us have comorbidities. Some of us, have been impacted by things like strokes, paralysis, kidney failure, and other things. And I am one of the lucky people who was relatively less impacted by those things. So when I speak about exercise post-dissection, I just want to, everyone, as we all know, talk to your cardiologist about your exercise program and what's appropriate for you. We're each unique, we're each different. So I'm going to go back to January of 2021. And if you can think back to that time, it was high COVID. The vaccines had just come out, but only for healthcare workers. We really didn't have access to the quick tests that became ubiquitous later on. I had been working as an executive director of a workforce development not-for-profit in Chicago called Year Up Chicago, Year Up. And we helped young people get access to internships who weren't going to college or working a livable wage job. And who knew during the pandemic, companies did not need interns. So my role ended at the very beginning, at the outset of the pandemic. And so I would say I was kind of in a transitional moment 9 months later when my wife and I were up here at our beautiful cabin in the Upper Peninsula. And by the way, we get about 200 inches of snow a winter. So it's late January, it's COVID. We've invited some dear friends up from Chicago to stay at a little guest house we have adjacent to our cabin. And for a socially distanced COVID weekend, before all this, I was a pretty active person. I had done a number of Ironman triathlons. I had run a number of marathons. I was a long distance endurance cyclist. Sometimes I would ride my bike 400 miles from Chicago up to our cabin. And I snowshoed, I cross-country skied, was very, very active. And that's going to be a little important as we move on as well to my story. So my friends came up. There was 3 feet of snow on the ground. We only met outside because it was COVID, and things were really at a bad point. Many people were dying from it, and so we spent the day snowshoeing and cross country skiing. Probably spent 2 or 3 hours back in the woods, snowshoeing, cross country skiing, and we decided to have brats and beer at a campfire, a very COVID thing to do. We invited a couple who are across the lake from us, some dear friends, to join us. They brought the brats. We had the beer. The beer was Pabst Blue Ribbon. And it's funny, the same friends who were there that night, it just happened to be here this weekend. We were talking about this yesterday. And my friend said that suddenly during our campfire, eating brats, drinking beer, they said I became grumpy. Now, I mean, I'm not a very grumpy person, but apparently, at least according to them, I was just out of character. Just saying abrupt things to people. And I remember, and it was probably about 10 degrees, so that's -12 Celsius, 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So it was very cold. The wind chill was below zero, and the snow was piled high. We had a roaring fire going. And I remember taking a swig of Pabst Blue Ribbon beer. And I felt a little gurgle in my neck and didn't think much of it. And I started to feel like I had a chest cold. And that was it. Now, 95% of people will talk about ripping and tearing and whatnot. Not me. I was in the 5% that were atypical. And essentially, I felt like I had a bad cold. And so I did what any reasonable person would do at that time and in that place. I decided that I had COVID. Now, up here in the wilderness, we're probably a half hour away from the nearest town. And by town, I mean a little place with 400 people. The nearest kind of quasi real medical hospital is a 2-hour drive away. And so I was thinking, as I tell this story, it's kind of like watching a scary movie where the protagonist keeps going around corners that they should not go around and keeps doing the absolute wrong thing. And so I'm going to describe all the wrong things I did after I have felt that little gurgle in my neck with the Pabst Blue Ribbon. First thing I did, I diagnosed myself with COVID. So what do you do if you have COVID? Well, you go up to your room, you close your door, you make sure your wife stays out of the room, so you don't give her COVID, of course. And I got into bed. And I didn't feel very good, but I didn't feel horrible. And I spent a restless night. Now, you all know the statistics about morbidity in the hours after an aortic dissection. 1 hour, many people unfortunately pass right at the moment. They rupture out at the moment of dissection. And things only get worse the longer you go. Well, I went to sleep and stayed in my bed. The beer and brats were Friday night. Saturday morning, I wake up, don't feel very good, but I figure, well, this must be what COVID is like. And my wife and our friends did what any rational people would do when they had one person in their party who had COVID and couldn't go out. They went cross-country skiing and snowshoeing for the day. And I stayed in my room, I think watching YouTube videos about off-grid cabins in Alaska or something just to distract myself. And then towards that evening, so that's 24 hours after the incident began, I had a great insight. I remembered my son at the time was an ICU nurse, and unfortunately he dealt with a lot of COVID patients. And he told me that if you had COVID, they would get you to prone on your stomach, put all your pressure to relieve the pressure from your chest so that you could breathe more easily. So, I said, I will spend the night proning myself because I have COVID. And that's what I did. And it did not make anything better. In fact, I kind of felt worse. And by Sunday morning, this is now 36 hours later, I was texting with my son and he said, you really should go to an ER if you have COVID. And which I didn't want to do because I'm up in a rural area. I know the hospitals are already full and don't have great capacity. And so I had another brilliant idea. I said, why don't my wife and I wear masks? I'll sit in the back seat, she can drive, and we will drive 6.5 hours back to Chicago where, there's lots of big hospitals and our doctors are and stuff like that. So Sunday morning, 36 hours after the incident, we get in our car and our friends drive behind us, and we start a journey to Chicago. About a half hour in, the first little town called Boulder Junction, Wisconsin, we had to stop for gas. And my wife said, the air is low in the tires. Why don't you get out and fill the tires up with air? So I get slowly out of the car, out of the back seat, and kind of slowly would make my way around. And I bend over and I take that air hose and I push it up to these are not things we should be doing, but pushing it up onto the tire nozzle, filled up the tire. I got back in the car and my wife Ave said, "What? It took you so long." But we traveled on, and the next town, slightly bigger, it's called Minocqua. Maybe they have 2,000 people who live in Minocqua. But in Minocqua, they have a Walgreens drugstore. And a brilliant idea came to me once again that at Walgreens, I could buy one of those oximeters, those little things you put on your finger and it reads your blood oxygen level. And that would tell me how bad my COVID is. So my wife went into Walgreens, came out with the oximeter, put it on my finger. It was normal. I said, well, that's odd because if I have COVID and my blood oxygen level is normal, maybe I just have the early stages of it. We got back in the car and kept driving. About 2 hours into our drive, I had another brainstorm. And this turned out to be the first good one. I remembered that my hospital back in Chicago had an 800 telemed number that you could call and do a virtual healthcare check-in. So I thought, well, and I knew that we were near Wausau, Wisconsin, a town of about 40,000 people in rural northern Wisconsin. And I knew there was a hospital in Wausau. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking the next real hospital was 200 miles away in Madison, Wisconsin. And so I called the 800 number, and 5 minutes later, I got a video call from an angel. Well, it wasn't really an angel. It was a nurse practitioner whose name is Nicole Marks. And Nicole, in about 5 minutes, established rapport with me. She asked a number of questions. She could visually observe, my demeanor. And she said, listen, I think you should pull over and go to the nearest emergency room. She said it might be pneumonia, could be an embolism, could even be COVID. She said, but your symptoms are getting worse and I don't like what I'm hearing, and that's what you should do. I said, thank you very much. We're only 4.5 hours away from Chicago. I think we're going to keep on going. And then Nicole said something that ended up changing my life's trajectory. She said, if you're going to keep driving, be prepared to pull over to the side of the road and call 911. And for the first time in my stubborn, idiosyncratic thinking brain, something said, maybe I should just listen to her. My wife took the next exit, which just happened to be the exit for Aspirus Wausau Hospital. The only hospital, as I said, within 200 miles that had a cardiothoracic team. It was a Sunday afternoon and it was high COVID. And we pulled into the driveway of the ER and no one was allowed in aside from me. My wife had to stay in the car. Our friends stayed in their car. And in I went. I think they put me in a wheelchair. I'm not sure. And it was a typical Sunday afternoon in winter in Wausau, Wisconsin, which is kind of a ski town. Broken bones, torn ACLs, that kind of thing. And eventually they called me and they did a few minor tests. They checked my vitals. Everything was normal. They did an EKG, normal. They checked my blood pressure, normal. They did a chest x-ray, normal. And God bless the triage nurse. She said, look, everything turns out is checking out normal. We really can't find anything. And then I said to her, it kind of feels like my chest is half full of sand. And I saw her eyes imperceptibly narrow. And the next thing you know, she sent me in for a CT, which we all know is the gold standard for diagnosing aortic dissection. I went in for the CT. I think they put me on a gurney right afterwards and brought me to a room where I was waiting much longer than I thought I should have. Finally, a nurse came in and I said, it's COVID, isn't it? And she looked at me and she said, you'd be lucky if it was COVID. The doctor will be here soon. And by doctor, she meant a doctor who was driving in from home on a Sunday afternoon. And a little while later, Dr. Ron Miles came into the room. He broke protocol and asked that my wife be allowed into the ER room to hear whatever he was going to say. He told me that I had an aortic dissection, which was news to me because I didn't know what an aorta was. I had never heard of it. And I said, look, why can't we just drive the rest of the 4 hours to Chicago? I've got doctors back there. We can, take care of it if need be. And he interrupted me and he said, you won't make it. And he said, we need to operate immediately. He drew a little picture. In fact, I still have a photo of the little drawing that he did. And the drawing showed that a dissection at 4.3 centimeters. And yes, for those of you who uh, know that sometimes people talk about limits of 5.0 and whatnot, I dissected at 4.3. And his drawing had a little dime-sized black dot on the ascending with two arrows showing that apparently a blood clot was preventing a full rupture. Dr. Miles was a man in a hurry. I was not in so much of a hurry, though. I didn't know this guy. I didn't know if he was a Yahoo. I didn't know what kind of surgeon he was. So he stepped away for a few minutes, and I got my phone, and I called a doctor friend of mine back in Chicago. And I just very briefly explained what was going on. And my friend went online and checked him out, Ron Miles. And it turned out that he had spent 10 years practicing as a cardiothoracic surgeon at a very well-respected hospital in Chicago before he came up to lead the practice at Aspirus Wausau. And with that news, I had a mental shift, and I just decided I needed to trust him. I had been trusting my own instincts up to this point, and I had been wrong at nearly every single turn. And I would say I kind of surrendered. And he said, "We need to operate now." And he said, "But there's more." He said, "You have a 30% chance of dying during surgery. You have a 10% or more chance of stroke, paralysis, kidney failure." He said, "This is the most complicated surgery we do here at this hospital. And it's a life-risking process." And my wife was standing there taking all this in, I think, in some disbelief. And because I had decided to trust him, I said, "Okay, there's two things. One, I need to call my kids. Two, I want us to agree on a do not resuscitate order." And so he said, "That's fair enough." I got on the phone, called my adult son and daughter. I got to tell you, the anesthesiologist was in a big hurry. He kept looking at the watch, doing this while I'm talking to my kids, and I was like, "Just a minute, don't rush me." And we talked about the DNR as well. And I remember Dr. Miles saying, he said, "I've seen cases where 14 days later the kidney comes back on." And I said, "Well, if we're in that kind of territory, you and Ave, my wife, are just going to have to address that issue when it comes. But my general intent was, if things went badly, I did not want extraordinary means of any kind." And one of the staff members said, "Well, we got to go." They were in a big hurry. And I kissed my wife, told her that I loved her. And one of the staff members said, "Give her another kiss." And off we went. And my wife always says she was just kind of in shock. And I went off and was chatting merrily with the hospital staff as they were wheeling me into surgery. My post-operative experience was good, in the sense, well, most of it was good. I think I tried to pull the ventilator out when I was coming to, and I think they strapped me down, which I really didn't like at all. But I didn't have much to say about what they should be doing right after the surgery. Dr. Miles operated from about 3:00 in the afternoon till midnight, and by himself. And he saved my life. He came back when I spoke to him the next day. By the way, they had me up walking that same day, Monday morning or Monday afternoon, as soon as I was conscious. He said, you know, he said, I was able to really get in your valve and fix that good. And he put the graph in on the ascending. He said, now there was a 4.6 aneurysm on the arch, but I didn't touch it. He said, I think you'll be fine the rest of your life. Let me pause for a minute on that point. What neither Dr. Miles nor I knew at that time was that I was not the only family member who has aortic disease. I don't know if many of you have, let's call them dysfunctional, non-communicative families. That's kind of one I have. And I knew that one of my brothers, I'm one of six siblings, one of my brothers had a quote unquote heart attack 2 or 3 years earlier. I didn't know that actually he had an aortic dissection. He was about 60, he was about my age at the time. He dissected at 5.0. And it turns out afterwards, as I found out later, that I have another brother who is at a 4.7 and is in watch and wait and continues in watch and wait to this day. And I have another brother who has aneurysms as well. He recently had a intravascular stent put in his descending. And plus, I have 2 other family members, slightly more distant than my siblings, who have aortic disease. Unknown genetic cause, but clearly a familial connective tissue disorder in my family. So Dr. Miles, not knowing any of that, left the arch in place. I also think he had his hands full doing the job he did on my ascending. And I think the complication of the arch, of doing the arch as well, maybe would have been too much for one person in that hospital at that time. But I will forever be grateful to Dr. Miles for saving my life. I went home from the hospital 4 days after the open heart surgery and had relatively few medical complications. It was like getting run over by a tank. It's nothing in life prepares you for open heart surgery or an aortic dissection. We left in the middle of a snowstorm. There was a blizzard the Thursday when I went home. And I remember Dr. Miles, he said something else that would be very important for my recovery. He said 2 things. One is I had told him that I had planned to through hike across the Upper Peninsula of Michigan the summer afterwards on the North Country Trail. It'd be 530-mile hike. And I asked him, do you think I can still do it? And he said, oh, yeah, I'm sure you can. Now, for reasons I'll explain, that didn't happen. But he said so. But he put in my mind that it was possible to return to a normal life from the very beginning. I'm always grateful to him for that. And he said something else. My wife says I'm a little bit obsessive compulsive, maybe, I don't know. He said, when you get home, he said, 4 times a day, I want you to walk, starting out for 1 minute. But I want you to add a minute each day to your walk. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to add a minute to all 4 of the walks. And if you start doing geometry and mathematical increase, the net effect was in the early days, during the polar vortex when I got home and it was like 20, 30 below, 40 below, I don't know, something crazy. I was literally walking around the perimeter of my house for a few minutes. But each day I was doubling it or adding another minute or so. The net effect was probably within a month, I was walking for 5 miles a day, just little by little, by little, by little, incrementally adding a few minutes more each day to each walk. And I really believe that dramatically helped my recovery. I think it helped both that I was fit going in, and I know it helped afterwards to kind of push myself through all the real lack of energy that we all feel after these kind of things, and also because of the beta blockers. Since then I've averaged walking 6 miles a day every day over a 2.5-year period. And have added some other things along the way. Now, one other thing I wanted to emphasize here from very early days was the importance of social media groups like Aortic Hope. I had no idea what I was in for, psychologically, physically, prognosis, any of that. And I have to tell you, and if you're watching this video, you probably know this as well. You can have conversations about things that no one else in the world really can understand, like the aortic community. And the two takeaways that I got from the social media group on Facebook and other places was, number one, live your life. This isn't a death sentence. It's not something that where we should stop living, but we need to adapt to a new way of living. And the second thing, which was equally important for me, was get a second opinion. I had a 4.6 aortic arch aneurysm after my dissection surgery, and I had dissected a 4.3. My cardiologist back in Chicago had me on watch and wait and kind of said, come back in 6 months, which I thought was a little strange because I had just dissected at a 4.3 and I was living with a 4.6 aneurysm. So I kind of, something about that didn't quite compute for me. And along with the fact that I then learned about my familial history, I took the advice that honestly I learned on social media and went to the Cleveland Clinic to get a second opinion. And many of you know Cleveland Clinic is, I think they do 1,200 aortic surgeries a year. It's more than any other hospital in the U.S. at least. They have a large aortic practice. They see a wide variety of cases. They have 16 cardiac ICUs in their hospital, not just ICUs, cardiac ICUs. And so I went to Cleveland and saw Dr. Miyasaka, a cardiologist, and a surgeon named Dr. Vargo. And they all agreed that given my family history, given when I dissected, that it wasn't an emergency, but that I should have the arch replaced. But Dr. Vargo wanted to wait another 6 months to let me heal from the first open heart surgery to get ready to have the second open heart surgery to replace the arch. And now the crazy Iron Man brain in me starts to say, oh, now I get to train for open heart surgery. And so I would say to my walking, I added open water swimming, which I love to do. And for me, swimming is like walking. It's just a wonderful, relaxing thing to do. And so right out in our lake here, I was able to swim a mile or mile and a half, a couple times a week. I biked. I did some bikes of 40, 50, 60 miles to prepare to train for open heart surgery. And by the way, all those things were done with the approval of Dr. Vargo. I ran by, I would show my heart rate monitor and my data and all that kind of stuff. And they were fine with me doing that. And come September, 6 months after I dissected, I went to Cleveland Clinic and had a second open heart surgery. About the same kind of recovery from that, and went relatively well. I had one little thing happen. During the surgery, when they were putting a probe up, I spontaneously dissected without an aneurysm on my descending. So near the abdomen, so from the abdomen to the radial iliac is now descending. As Dr. Miyasaka said, you dissect easily. But that's kind of scarred over, healed over, and is medically managed at this point. So let me just flash forward a little bit to more recently. Many of us know that drugs we have to take, particularly the beta blockers, are like a wet blanket, and really, can bring us down on energy and all that kind of stuff. So we, sometimes really have to push through. And I noticed on social media that there was kind of like a subset of people who were slightly different. I'm going to say maybe 20, 25%. And there were people who probably were relatively athletic before dissection and continued to be afterwards. And I was in that category too. And, some of us have ended up in Dr. Siddharth Prakash's post-aortic dissection exercise study, which, by the way, is still open. If any of you out there are interested in jumpstarting your own exercise program, I highly recommend joining. If you can get to either Houston, Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I went, or St. Louis, Missouri, for an initial intake, join the post-aortic dissection exercise study. It is going to be the first benchmark. I think they hope to get about 100 people participating. It will provide the first benchmark for a scientific, data-driven standard for exercise and permitting what I would call moderate exercise that Dr. Prakash and others believe is perfectly safe for people post-aortic dissection and even in watch and wait who are stable and who are maintaining their blood pressure below 120 at rest. So maybe we can even put in our notes down below the information to check out the post-aortic dissection exercise study that Dr. Prakash is running. That's my little plug for them. And then last of all, one of the great pleasures, I don't know if you can see my shirt here, Aortic Athlete. At a personal level, I had a fun thing happen this past June. I ran my first half marathon. Now, running is a little bit of an exaggeration. I basically speed walked, jogged, let's call it 13-minute miles. And again, done with approval of cardiologists. I did a echo stress the month before to make sure everything was stable, and I really built up to it little by little by little by little over the last 2.5 years, and had a wonderful experience and kind of felt like I'm back a little bit. So that's the other subtext of this story. It's kind of there and back again. So that's, in a nutshell, my story. I think we're live, and I think Joshua is somewhere here in the mix. Joshua, do we have any, what do we do now? access to quality healthcare. Can I tell you how privileged I am to have
Oh, Jack,
stumbled on
you
to
know, hold
a
on one
great
second.
hospital?
Hold on
Yeah.
one second, Jack. Everybody just listen to a bunch of silence. Because as I do, I constantly forget to unmute myself to the community. All right, so hi, Molly. Hi, Terry. And Karen, they're watching us from Hershey Park. P. Nadalin says, I'm glad for you. You're fortunate to have had insightful healthcare providers. And our very own Velda McKenzie. Hi, Velda. And back to Jack.
Yeah, quality healthcare. I honestly, I am a privileged person. Many people in the world. I mean, since in our Aortic Athlete Facebook group, there's a guy from Papua New Guinea who dissected and was life flighted to Australia. I don't even know how he gets beta blockers in Papua New Guinea.
Oh, my
So
word.
we are blessed. I am blessed. I stumbled onto a great hospital in Wausau, Wisconsin. I had no idea it was there, and I was able to access Cleveland Clinic. So, amen to having access to quality healthcare being, it's the dividing line.
Yeah, yeah. All right, I have so many questions. Okay, so let's go from the beginning. And I loved how you couched this. You said, I'm going to tell you about all of the bad decisions that I made.
Stupid. I was stupid.
Okay, but um, when you got into the plank position, did you feel any extra pressure anywhere?
No,
No.
no, I didn't. I'm atypical.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think I later learned that, like I said, 5% of people are atypical. So if you're an emergency room staff and you're looking for the typical characteristics, you would have totally missed me. And that's why I really credit that triage nurse who
yeah.
went on a hunch, I think.
Well, okay, so to her, you said, it just feels like my chest is full of sand, right?
Yeah.
How long had you been feeling that?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think I've ever told anybody this. I'm going to be honest. I think I was exaggerating a little bit.
Okay.
I think I think my thinking was like, if this just ends with me walking out of this ER without knowing what's going on, that's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was feeling something, but I was not feeling in distress. I was tired. Didn't feel good. I something was wrong, but I didn't feel horrible.
Okay. Not horrible. John Brenny jumped in to say, hi, everyone.
Hey,
Jack.
John,
Jack is a
good to see
sweetheart.
you.
All right. So you mentioned that your friends were calling you grumpy and acting out of sorts. And so, like, you say that that's very out of your emotional spectrum or communicative spectrum. And I mean, you're super affable. This is you're and a magical storyteller. I have to tell you, I was on every word hanging. It was great. Great story. Um, how gruff were you getting? Are we talking like barks? Were you grumbling?
No,
Like, how out of
no.
sorts are we?
So my friend, who we went to high school together, was one of my old buddies who was up here at that time, and he and our neighbors came from across the lake, and he didn't really know them, and he said, I gotta apologize for my friend Jack. I don't know what's the matter with him tonight, but it's not like him to, say. I think I had told him, like, where's the wine bottle? I thought you went in to get another bottle of wine, or something.
I get it. I get it. Okay, so
uh,
snappy. That's out
a
of
little
sorts.
snappy.
Yeah.
That's what I was
Okay.
told. I honestly don't really remember that, but that's what I was told.
Okay.
So maybe that should be part of the diagnoses.
Oh, and then how can I forget? How can I forget? When you have COVID, what is the first thing you do? You tell your wife to get out of the bedroom. And then here you are spiraling
Alone in a bedroom with COVID air
with
quotes.
COVID. Oh my goodness. Okay, so and as we progress through the story, obviously, like we're still driving, right? And you're on the phone with or having this telehealth conference, and she says, she's like, okay, just to impart that last little bit of if there was any advice I could give anybody, be ready to pull over and call 911, right? And for you, that was like the signal flare just fired off. Okay.
Yeah, it got through my thick skull.
Right. So, was your wife driving when she heard that? Did she give you one of those wife looks? Was it like,
I, I think I forgot to mention. I don't know if I mentioned this. My wife, like at one point, said, "Do you think it could be your heart?" Now I'm a very healthy person, and
right?
I said to her, "Don't you think I would know if it was my heart?"
Ah, ah,
Hey, can I tell you? Can I add one little thing?
go for it.
About 3 months after I dissected, I got to meet the angel Nicole Marks at Rush Hospital in person and thank her. And a local TV station did a little story and stuff like that.
Ah,
And
that's great.
I got to thank Nicole Marks. She's on my speed dial on my cell phone. I can call her anytime, and really, she is a beloved.
That's wonderful. Oh, wow, that's so good. Ah, we have to get that link too and put that in the description. Okay, so then we get to the hospital, the lovely moment. Go ahead and kiss your wife again. And she's in shock. She's just sitting there, kind of, what's happening? Okay. How long are you awake by now?
Well, you mean well, I'm just in a gurney waiting to go into surgery.
Yes, but presumably you haven't really slept, right?
Oh, I think I slept badly.
Okay.
I mean, I hadn't been awake for this was like 46 hours post dissection.
Mm-hmm.
If you go by the statistics, I was like a 1%er or
All the
something.
way down there. Yep.
And I had this little dime-shaped blood clot that was keeping me from rupturing.
And that's a miracle. That's a miracle all by itself. When you said that that was what took place, I was like, imagine being the surgeon who's trying to tell this man, "Sir, I have to do this immediately," right? And you're just not having it. Like, imagine him being like, "Sir."
My wife said that he like at one point, the only time he didn't lose his cool, but he got intentional. He saw I think the blood pressure reading was up to 190 or something like that on the little monitor, and I don't remember him saying this. He said something like, "Get that down now," and I remember him saying, 12 extra pints of blood.
Oh my
Get it
goodness.
now, and everyone except for me was moving with a great sense of urgency.
Alacrity. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my. Okay. Uh, Satyavrat Singh, I hope I said his name properly, or her name. Thanks, Jack, for sharing your experience. God bless you. What's your advice for people who have TAA not dissected?
So TAA is the stent. Is that right?
Oh, I think that means a. Oh,
Well,
this is always, yeah, this is always when I like to have
thoracic aortic ascending aneurysm. So
aneurysm,
she's in
yeah.
watch and wait. He or
And
she
that's what
is
I
in
would
watch
say,
and wait.
yeah. Watch and
Yeah.
wait.
Well, if you're in watch and wait, you're ahead of the game. If you're in watch and wait, you know what you need to do. This is a lifelong disease that requires a lifelong plan. You need to see your cardiologist regularly and have your CT or echo. You need to keep your blood pressure. And by the way, this is something I've learned since. Keep your blood pressure below 120. The systolic, the high number. A lot of some recommend 130 for people with aortic disease. Those of us who exercise, your blood pressure will go up a little bit. And so to account for that, we want to stay below 120. Dr. Siddharth Prakash says you can reduce your risk of dissection 50% by keeping your resting blood pressure below 120. I think following the basic guidelines of, making sure you stay stable and know that you're stable, keeping your blood pressure low, take your beta blockers, and exercise. And as I learned on Facebook from social media groups like this, live your life. Don't let it define you. Live your life. You're gonna have a long, meaningful life. You've dodged the bullet already because you haven't dissected. And so, we have the guidelines are there for a reason. Follow them. Get yourself to a high volume aortic center if you're not there. If you have the means to do that, and go on living your lovely life.
That's exactly what we like to hear. Let's see. How do I ask this next question? You didn't have a whole lot of post-traumatic stress coming out of the surgery.
Everybody's different.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know I have a lease on life, and people would say, "Has it changed you? What have you?"
Oh, you turned your camera off.
Oh no,
there you
sorry,
go. You're back.
Somebody called me. Sorry.
Oh,
what's changed since you had this near-death experience? And I always said, and I don't mean this at all flippantly, I said, they said, you must have a meaning in life now. There must be some deeper meaning. And I said, I think I need to be a more loving person.
Right.
Honestly, I think if I took anything out of it, I probably worked whatever PTSD I have had, maybe I did. I think I've worked out through exercise. Honestly, that's the way I process things. So lots of you walk 6 miles a day, you got lots of time.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's how I would answer it. I think my wife has more PTSD than me. She had to sit in the emergency room all alone, all night long by herself, with this very uncertain fate.
Yes. That's an important point to make. The caregivers, we have an entire community of caregivers for people that are, and post-traumatic stress, exactly, it exists. Very, very many of them express the hypervigilance right as they go to sleep, wondering if their partner, like if they snore and they're not snoring, they hit them. They're like, snore? I have to just snore now because I can't sleep without the snoring. Right? Like it's pretty interesting. They they watch and they go into a different mode. They go from loving wife to wife and caregiver, and it's a stress all its own. They're angels, all of them.
Yeah, I agree, and kudos to my wife, Ave, who really has been both tremendous support throughout. I remember pretty early on, she once said to my kids, "Why is Dad sitting in the chair all the time? He's just sitting there."
That's going to be a change, right?
Yeah, but it gets better. It gets better. Over 2.5 years later, I think my body is adapted to the beta blocker, the metoprolol, and I feel just a lot more energy. And so we're different. We're changed, but.
Well, that's a great point to make. After your dissection, during the first year and a half of recovery, how often did you have to, or I guess 6 months later, you go into your second surgery. So into that second year, how often were you changing your prescription? How often were you seeing any side effects?
At the beginning, at the start, I think I was on 100 milligrams of metoprolol, and it was like carrying around a wet blanket everywhere you went. It was just oppressive. And I am, for good reasons, post-surgery. I know they want to keep the thrust low in the blood vessels and stuff as your body's recovering from the surgery. So I eventually got it reduced to 50. I'm on 25 and 25 a day right now, which it's still a little bit of a downer, but it's manageable.
Okay, and there wasn't a whole lot of other in that category. Just the
Oh,
blood
well,
pressure.
I mean, I've got the usual list of 6 or 7 things:
Okay.
losartan and amlodipine and a statin and aspirin. By the way, anybody else get really annoyed by the baby aspirin we take? I get cuts all the time, everywhere. I'm bleeding all over the place, because I take these darn aspirin. But
Let's hope somebody has something to say about that. That'll be good.
that's my
Okay.
biggest annoyance.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So, you said that you were going to your cardiologist with reports. How were you collecting those reports? Like, what steps did you take right at that beginning of, I'm going to go ahead and start preparing for open heart surgery? I'm training for it.
Oh, yeah. So I have a polar chest heart rate monitor
Okay.
that I would wear. I think I wore it, when I was walking. So just to give you an idea, like when I did this half marathon in June, my average heart rate was probably 115. So it was extremely low. So I believe in building a massive low heart rate base. So literally starting from walking and little by little by little by little by little, building a base so that, if I go from walking an 18-minute mile to jogging a 13-minute mile, I think you can actually, keep things low. But the important thing is the heart rate isn't as important as blood pressure during exercise. So how do you check your blood pressure while you're exercising? It's not easy. So that's why you might want to do a stress test, a echo stress test, that where they can kind of see what happens to you during exercise. Dr. Prakash's post-aortic dissection intake thing, they do that. They take your blood pressure while you're doing bicep curls, right? So while you're doing a wall sit or while you're doing leg lifts. And so they know what your body's doing during exercise. If you're over 160 systolic, they won't let you in the study. And so so here's my citizen scientist thing. I have, I got a Walgreens battery operated blood pressure cuff. So I was out for a run yesterday, and I take my blood pressure while I'm running. So at 5 miles, I'll stop, take my blood pressure, and see what it is. And so like yesterday's run, I know my readings were all between 110 and 120 while I was exercising. So that gets me beyond the fear factor a little bit. Like what all of the cardiologists tell you we want to avoid are these extreme blood spikes, like deadlifting, where your systolic number can go to 300. Like that's the one thing that's been scientifically proven to be really bad. But the truth is that the rest of exercises that we do, mostly low level or moderate, there's no evidence, there's no data that it's harmful or dangerous.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what I find most interesting about that data is that typically it's being captured from, people that are elderly, right? They're in their 70s, and obviously they're not going to tell you to do a whole lot of anything because this is when that typically happens. And so that's what's very strange for people who are out there Googling, because it's like, where am I in this age range, and how much data do we have with age down here? It doesn't exist, and that's why this group exists. I think that's the biggest thing that's helpful.
Joshua, that's a great point. And the in my humble opinion, the medical healthcare establishment is geared towards sedentary people with high blood pressure who and so they kind of don't quite know what to make of some of people who are lowering their blood pressure through exercise along with their meds. And they kind of look at you like you're crazy. Dr. Vargo in Cleveland Clinic said that his favorite thing that a patient once said to him that they had heard from their cardiologist was, "Don't lift anything heavier than a fork." Well, if that's what you did, I guarantee you'll become obese. You'll become depressed, you'll become sedentary, your blood pressure will go up, and you'll have more dissections. That's like the worst advice possible. But so there's a shift that we're in the middle of in the cardiology community about aortic disease, where exercise is becoming prescribed as opposed to prohibited.
Yes, the American community could definitely use from that prescription exercise, 100%. Not just for healthcare, but anxiety, further,
Sure.
helping all of that. I mean, one of the reasons why I feel like you're so cheerful is because you're out in the sun. We're supposed to be out in the sun. And so that's helpful. I like all the advice that you're giving. Do you want to tell us briefly a little bit about the Aortic Athletes Facebook page? Just a tiny bit, not too much, because again, I want to tease everybody about the conversation that you and Karen will be having, where you'll go full blown into it. So just the teaser.
Yeah, I mean, basically 6 months ago, I saw a need for this niche. We are a subset of a subset. We're a relatively rare disease to begin with, and I saw. Here was the thing. I think on some of the general groups, there are people who are dealing with some really serious side effects from aortic disease, and if you start talking about exercising, some people may think you're boasting, you're making people feel bad or something like that. So I kind of want to create a safe space where people who were pushing the envelope a little bit on exercise could have an open conversation about that without making anybody else feel bad. That's not our no one's intent. And so Carmen David, many people in the aortic community know Carmen. After I dissected, I did a Google search about a week later, and here was the search: aortic dissection marathon. You don't get a lot of results. In fact, I found two. One was Carmen David. She had run a marathon a couple of years ago in New York City at the New York City Marathon, and second is a guy named Luis Silva, who lives in Switzerland, who dissected like Carmen in his 30s, and has been able to continue doing some interesting things in Switzerland running wise, but not a lot. So I reached out to Carmen and I said, hey, I got this idea. So we started this group. We now have 340 members. It's a hangout place. We follow the science. We're not crazy. And I believe with Karen Anderson, one thing we share is everybody has access to everything. We're all open. We want to share information across platforms. That's why I'm happy to come on Aortic Hope. Karen comes on, does things on Aortic Athletes. This is all good. It's all about getting good information out to good people.
Right on. That's why we do it, right? Jack, you were an amazing guest, I have to say.
Well, I'm glad. I'm really happy all the things you guys are doing to really innovate with the technology, with the platform you have, and we hope to use it.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I also understand that you're going to be introducing us to the life-saving people that you get to work with, and we're looking forward to hearing that conversation as well.
Good. Yeah, we're going to stay tuned. We're going to be bringing some cardiologists who are doing research in aortic disease and exercise from around the world and do some chats like this.
Okay. Right on. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
No, just thank you. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you, and God bless. All right, Jack. You're amazing. We'll see you soon.
Okay, Joshua. Thank you. Thanks all.